Hi everyone, my name is Paramita and welcome to my YouTube channel. Before I get into what this channel is about and today's video, let me give you a little bit of context about the channel as such. So this is not a new channel. I hope I am audible. I don't know. Anyways, so this is not a new channel. I used to have a channel back in 2018. I had started this channel. It was called Academic Affairs, and aptly so because the initial reason for starting this channel was to upload supplementary lectures for my classes. I was teaching at that time. I was teaching at a college in the University of Delhi. And I had a fairly large class of about 90 students, and I used to have these 55-minute long lectures. I was teaching 19th century British literature, and there were students from various backgrounds. They were also at different points, different levels of reading and engagement and attention. They had different paces, so I often had to find that that median point of where I was accessible to everyone, but also enabling the students to critically engage with the texts. So this was kind of always a challenge, to accommodate all of this in those 55-minute lectures, and also then finish the syllabus on time. So what I did was, I had an exceptionally bright class. These students were, they were curious and they were eager to learn new material. They were very, they were prompt, and the wonderful students, very immersed in the material, so I wanted to do justice to their kind of that enthusiasm as well. And so I started the channel. I decided to do these on weekends, to do these lectures. These were mostly close readings of specific sections of the novels that I was teaching. I was teaching Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice at that time, but also introduce them to a certain sort of the location of these texts within history of ideas, introduce sort of new concepts, new theoretical interpretations of these texts. So they were a bit advanced, more advanced than I could go, in the format of the traditional classroom lecture. For one of my videos, I did this close reading of the Red Room episode of Jane Eyre, where I brought in critical race theory, queer theory, psychoanalysis, and I sort of did a reading of that episode and that chapter via these theoretical interventions, and that the students actually found that very interesting and useful. And I would send them the link after I had uploaded the videos, and they were free to watch them. I mean, these were not things that would normally be asked in the exams, so they were free to watch them. It was kind of a little bit of an extra work that they could sort of engage in, it was completely voluntary. There was no coercion, but I found the process of making these videos very rewarding. I'm a modernist by training. I'm not trained in Victorian literature, but so in the process of making these videos, I also learned a lot. It was a learning experience for me, and I found that I enjoyed talking about what I was researching, and I liked to talk about my ideas on camera. So that was something that I actually had started at that time. And then of course I changed jobs. I joined a different university, and my students graduated, and I stopped making those videos. I never had the time afterwards, and the channel was dormant for a while, and then I just decided to delete it because I didn't feel that it was useful, although in retrospect I regret not keeping copies of those lectures, because I think they would have been useful even as pedagogic tools for myself. Anyway, so that is where that is the genesis of this channel. And I am planning to, so for a while, every summer, since 2018, 2019, I have been thinking of reviving the channel. Every summer, I think of this as a project that I will take up and then eventually end up not seeing through. all kinds of reasons, COVID, and then life in general. But this year I thought maybe it's time to tick this checkbox and stop putting off things, and because I've really been wanting to resurrect this channel and to start making videos again, and I was like, it doesn't matter, I'm just gonna go for it now. I'm just gonna do what I want to do. It's high time. I'm not getting any younger. Things are definitely not getting any better in academia. I might as well do something that I enjoy, and so yeah, so here I am. Now, of course, I am not a lecturer at the moment. I am on a hiatus from teaching, so these are not going to be conventional lectures. They're not going to be structured as prepared lectures. Instead, what I plan to do is more informal conversations on books, texts, films, art, anything that I am researching on. And so obviously it's going to be academic affairs still, but I will steer clear of any kind of specialist discourse. I don't want these videos to to sort of have too much jargon or to be too inaccessible. I want them to be general and pleasurable. And so what I'm thinking of is at this moment, I mean, it might change in the future, but what I'm thinking of right now is to kind of do reviews, so video reviews of books, texts, but also films and art, because I deal with visual culture as well, that I am working on. So it will be something of a kind of work in progress, where because it's always easier to share one's thoughts, those sort of unformed and inchoate thoughts before finalizing them. It's a good exercise to kind of talk about them and share them and send them out into the world. And so that's basically the plan. I've also been, I also review, I work as a reviewer for several publications, and I've also been doing academic reviews, and I have found the format of the review quite useful, in disciplining in my writing and structuring my thoughts. And so I actually want to incorporate some of that into these videos. So I will be talking about, so I also don't want to categorize the channel as a traditional booktube, because I don't want to box it into a specific niche, but I'm sure eventually a pattern will form. A little bit about my background. So I do have a PhD, and my PhD is on Virginia Woolf. So I'm a modernist by training. The periods that I work with are the 20th and 21st centuries. I've recently been doing some work on critical literature, basically writings that deal with environmental toxicity and waste. And so my PhD was on the body, and I looked at Virginia Woolf's strategies of rethinking the body through figurations of disembodiment. So I looked at these the concept of disembodied embodiment, if you will. So the spectre, phantoms, ghosts, hauntings, but also anomalous embodiments, so monstrosity, abjection, and so forth, as new ways of thinking about the body outside of the metaphysical binaries of matter slash spirit or mind, flesh versus meaning, the sort of so using a kind of a mixture of deconstruction and phenomenology, and to look at these literary strategies of rethinking embodiment, essentially, in her novels and non-fiction. So I've continued to work on embodiment, and recently I've been looking at the figure of the monster, and what the affordances of monstrosity and non-anomalous embodiments, non-normative embodiments, its relationship with anthropocentric ideals of the human, but also debility and bodies that sort of live and survive under conditions of duress caused by late capitalist sort of structures. So yeah, that's kind of the terrain of my research. to put it very broadly. But the books that I will be talking, this is relevant because the books that I plan to sort of introduce, talk about in these videos and the subsequent videos are books that correspond to these areas of interest. So a lot of literature that I'm dealing with now are reflections, are provocations on the question of trauma, both interpersonal, intergenerational trauma, but also environmental trauma, trauma as it relates to climate and ecology. I am also interested in, again, bodies, subjectivities that don't fit into normative constructions of the human, of the socialized subject, which is also always racialized and gendered and classed constitutions. So these are some of the concerns that I will be visiting and revisiting in the course of these videos. So I also have been recently working on narratives of illness and disability and disease, but also looking at literature's intervention into medical discourse and sort of the demedicalization of the pathological body, of the abnormal body. So that's another area of interest, and I will be looking at some books which engage with these areas, these concerns. Today I want to talk about a book that I am currently working on, and it's part of a longer project, a paper that I'm writing, which is a comparative study of two contemporary British novels. Today I will be talking about one of them, which is, I have the Kindle edition, which is ugly. I don't know, I don't even want to, so I don't know if it's even visible. So this is Helen Oyeyemi's White is for Witching, published in 2009. The other book is Claire Koda's Woman Eating, which I will reserve for another video. Both are spectacular texts, highly recommended, especially Oyeyemi. I am pretty late to start reading her works. She's been writing for a while. This was published in 2009, but I've only recently started reading her, and oh my god, I am in love with her writing. I'm in love with her narrative style, with the way in which she appropriates and re-articulates Gothic tropes, the way she sort of what she does with narrative conventions, the narrative epistemology. I mean, I absolutely love this book in particular, and there are two things that I am interested in this book. One is the Gothic, the postmodern Gothic, and so the ways in which Gothic iconography is reproduced in this book, and also challenged and subverted and radicalized in a post-colonial context, in the context of a Britain whose boundaries are shifting and whose identity as a former imperial seat of power is, has been under duress for quite a while, and in the context of Brexit and questions of imperial nostalgia, this particular use of the Gothic becomes very interesting, very generative. The other thing, my interest in this book, like, I started reading this book because I kind of found out that this is a book that deals with eating disorders, and I have lived experience of eating disorders, and I have also very recently started delving into just dipping my toe into the vast literature on eating disorders, both clinical literature but also cultural texts, and so I actually started reading this book as part of that project, and I was intrigued. Actually, I was a little apprehensive when I started reading this book, because I thought that there is often this danger, that there would be this danger where anorexia would become, which is one of the eating disorders represented in this book, that anorexia would become a metaphor or an allegory for larger sort of political concerns like race and immigration and border policing and so on. So like the anorexic body would become a kind of microcosm or an allegory for the nation. And so I was a little bit apprehensive of that happening, and so the text kind of ultimately taking away from or moving away from the socio-political context of eating disorders in women specifically. And but I was actually pleasantly surprised that that is not what happens in this text, and it beautifully manages to do both. So it talks about it uses the Gothic to actually articulate some of these political concerns, particularly that of racism and xenophobia and the kind of patriarchal bases of these inequities, but there is also a great deal of very sensitive engagement with the psychodynamics of eating disorders, and Oyeyemi has done such an amazing work of representing the psychology and the subjectivity of someone with an eating disorder. Now, one of the sort of simplifications that often happen in interpretations of eating disorders is that it is purely a response to media images or to patriarchal consumer capitalist sort of ideals of femininity as thinness, as a certain kind of body image ideal. While that might trigger a lot of eating disorders, and that is definitely one of the catalysts for disordered relation with food, eating disorders have a much deeper and wider sort of etiology than just being a response to late capitalist media or late capitalist discourses or ideals of femininity. A lot of eating disorder is connected with trauma, especially developmental trauma. Some of it also have to do with cultural practices around food. Some of it have to do with family dynamics around nutrition and cooking and essentially around gastronomy. So it is a very complex field, and you really cannot reduce it to just it being a response. And what that model does is it often deprives the anorectic of subjectivity, of agency, sorry, not subjectivity, but of agency, and sort of reduces her into this into this kind of zombie-like figure who's simply responding to these images or these ideals of thinness, these ideals of these feminine ideals, and kind of trying to replicate that and destroying herself in the process. So it is never that linear, it's never that simplistic. And I speak from lived experience again. Often it's actually the opposite. A lot of anorexia and even bulimia and other eating disorders to a certain extent are in fact rooted in a desire for control and autonomy, and often it is a compensation for a perceived sense of lack of control in other areas of one's life. So the body actually, so it's the anorexic body is not just trying to fit into a particular ideal. It is actually the site of a very profound conflict between these sort of between a sense of it being controlled or being taken over or being vulnerable, being permeable to sort of to being controlled or being influenced or being affected by forces that are external to it, and then this desire for resisting it by exercising forms of control over one's control over incorporation, over consumption, over basically what goes into the system. And of course, phenomenology is, personally for me, has been very useful, a very useful methodology for understanding eating disorders, because very literally the experience of an eating disorder is an embodied experience. It's not just a relationship with food, also a relationship of sort of negation or disgust or sort of elimination vis-a-vis food. It is actually more a relationship with one's embodied subjectivity. It's a very visceral experience, and so much of it is, yes, body dysphoria is of course a component of anorexia, of eating disorders, but it has also got to do with the body itself as a site of conflict between multiple forces, and it is very much a kind of a sort of unfulfilled and unfinished and ultimately corrupted desire for control and autonomy. Now, what happens with anorexia specifically is that the very tools that one uses to control and exercise autonomy are tools of oppression, are tools like starvation and asceticism, and extreme disciplining of the flesh that have actually been used traditionally to create docile subjects and docile feminine subjects. So this is the paradox of anorexia in many ways. It becomes a kind of catachresis in that sense. It becomes control and oppression sort of taken to an extreme, where it kind of becomes a performance that is then sort of enacted on the body itself. And so I think this is something that Oyeyemi really understands and brings out quite brilliantly in the book. And also the fact that this is, I think, it's the central conceit of the book, again, wonderfully explored and exploited, of anorexia being a kind of, or eating disorders being a kind of border phenomenon, a border concept. It is this obsession with purity, with sort of refusing not just food, but a kind of symbolic signification of food as a foreign substance, or a substance, an invading substance that will essentially not only make you fat. After a point, it is not even about the fatness, or about the weight or the calories. It is about this abstract idea that incorporating something means that it will have a kind of embodied effect, that it will interfere with this pure this pure body schema that one is trying to create through starvation. So it is very much an obsession with purity, and that obsession with purity is also, in the context of this novel, seen as central to xenophobia and racism, and this desire to preserve, to hold on to whiteness, the ideal of whiteness, whiteness as a form of cultural purity. So the book is essentially about, and I love the way in which these two sort of articulations of borders, the borders of the body, which is the pathological body, where food is seen as a kind of threat of the other. The food becomes the other, and it only highlights, or it only sort of underscores the permeability, the porosity of the body. In the end, it sort of ends up enforcing the fact that the body is not, this enclosed territory, that in fact it is vulnerable and it is permeable. So food as a kind of foreign object, and this gets interesting in this book. I'll come to that. And nationalism as a form of border policing, as a fear of the other, in sort of the interests of preserving this imagined purity of the race. And so how the racial discourse and the gender discourse kind of intersect is very, very interesting, and it's beautifully done in the course of the book. I'll just give you an outline of the plot. The book centers around the very provocatively named Miranda Silver. So all kinds of intertextual references, symbolic references. Miranda is Anglo-French. She moves to this house that belongs to her great-grandmother, who has her own sort of traumatic past of living through the war, and she is xenophobic. She has a deep hatred of anyone or anything non-British. She is racist, and she is obsessed with whiteness. And then there are 3 generations of women after her daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter, who sort of have to live with the legacy of this obsession with white purity. And so essentially it's a story about a haunted house called 29 Barton Road, and the ghost spirit of Anna Good, that's the name of the great-grandmother who lives in that house. And the house is also animated. The house also is it kind of ventriloquizes Anna's voice, and so the house is also a narrative voice in the text. And essentially she controls these women, and she also controls the borders of the house. And she punishes them. She basically punishes them for transgressing this imperative for purity. So both her daughter and granddaughter transgress. So her daughter wants to, she rebels against domesticity and wants to marry a foreigner, and is sort of in a very typically Gothic tradition reminiscent of Poe, is trapped in the house, and she sort of gets this amnesia, and she forgets her ambitions, her desires, and she sort of remains trapped in that house. We are not sure whether she's dead or what actually happens, but we sort of it's told to us that she sort of remains in that house as a kind of haunting presence. And then of course her daughter is Lily, right? Lily, yeah. So Lily Silver is again, she transgresses the dictum by actually stepping out of the country and working as a journalist in Haiti, which is also interesting because Haiti is seen as a kind of paradigmatic black geography. So she goes there to sort of do investigative journalism, and the spirit orchestrates her death. It's supposedly an accident. She dies in a shooting, but we're told that this too has been orchestrated by the ghost. And finally Miranda also transgresses by so she gets into a relationship with Or. She's Or, who's a Nigerian British girl, so a black girl, and of course that the house totally loses it when this happens, and basically it's a very passionate relationship, and they have sex, and the house sort of decides to punish. So the house almost kills Or, and the house kind of sees Or, house slash the good lady, that's the name, that's nickname that's given to Anna Good. So the good lady kind of sees this as a great act of transgression. So miscegenation is probably the hugest taboo that against that dictum of white purity, and she tries to kill Or. Parallelly, the house is also a bed and breakfast. So Miranda's father runs this house as a bed and breakfast, which is again very interesting. The idea of hospitality itself and the limits of that, but how hospitality is a kind of an act of resistance against this this sort of again this myth of purity, because it is actually a space that paradigmatizes hybridity. You have all kinds of people who are coming, visitors, guests who are coming to Dover. The novel is set in Dover, again a very symbolic, key strategic site, a border town, also the white chalk Dover cliffs. Okay, I can go on and on. There's so much to talk about, but essentially the guest house, so gets its share of non-British guests, and the house keeps tormenting these people until they are forced to leave. And it's the same with the employees as well. So we have African employees who are again attacked, and they sort of they start hallucinating. They start so there are these two children who basically are almost possessed, and so essentially the house expels anything that is foreign to its understanding of white Britishness. And so that is also happening parallelly, and then of course it decides to punish Miranda for the taboo, and Miranda then decides to fight back, and in the end she commits suicide, and very interestingly through an act of consumption by consuming batteries. And a couple of things. So Miranda not only has anorexia, so she is not only apprehensive of food and counts her bites, and is sort of obsessed with a certain body image, but she also has pica. Now pica is a specific kind of eating disorder where the person is attracted to or consumes obsessively of sometimes inedible substances, so things like chalk. In this case it's chalk, again very symbolic of the burden of whiteness, as it were, from which Miranda is unable to escape, but she wants to escape, and so that kind of conflict is also staged. Again, a very sort of, it's a conflict that is isomorphic. It's kind of symmetrical almost to the conflict that an anorexic body also experiences between certain kinds of between the desire to incorporate and the desire to expel, the imperative to expel rather. And so she consumes chalk and plaster, but it can also be anything. It can be plastic. It can basically be anything that is inedible, and that's actually harmful. Even hair that is actually harmful for the body. And this is what I think is like the conceit. This is basically what makes the book so interesting, because pica, unlike anorexia, is centered on a very specific kind of consumption, a very specific kind of eating practice. So whereas anorexia is the refusal of food altogether, the inability to eat, or the refusal to eat, resistance to food as such, pica is actually the willing, voluntary consumption of foreign substances, substances that are deemed foreign by the body. And so this is, I think, where there's this tension between foreignness as something to be expelled, and foreignness as something that is desired, and Miranda almost